Having your characters speak a foreign language in your screenplay is much more common now than it used to be, and so you're thinking about doing it. But how do you do it? Well, it's a lot easier than you think. Before you decide to start having your characters speak a foreign language in your story, there are two things that need to be at the forefront of your mind. First, you should be including the foreign language because it makes sense for the story that you're telling. I mean, if you're doing it just to do it, then like everything else in filmmaking, that's a bad decision. A general rule of thumb is if anyone says, you know what would be cool, having your main character speak a foreign language, well, yeah, not so much. So if you don't have a good story reason, don't do it. But a parent who doesn't approve of their child's choice of spouse decides to be passive-aggressive and only speaks Polish out of protest when that child is around. Okay, that's a story reason. Or a couple goes on vacation to Portugal and they get lost in a town where no one speaks English. Okay, that's a story reason. But there are a lot of non-story reasons to include a character speaking a foreign language. And if you know of a good example or have thought of one, put it below in the comments. And while you're down there, don't forget about all the fun buttons. And if you'd like my help in learning the craft of screenwriting or helping you out with your script, there's some links below that may be of help to you. And last, there is Patreon if you'd like to support me directly. I really do appreciate you doing all of those things, and they help YouTube know that this content is helpful so others can find this channel. But the second thing you have to have at the forefront of your mind, and probably the most important, is that when you include characters speaking in a foreign language in your screenplay, the reader must understand what you are doing. If the reader is confused or if you are inconsistent with how you note the foreign language, that's a problem. Your task is to write a story and tell it well, and you are writing a script to be read, which means the reader has to understand what you're doing. So if you choose to write foreign dialogue in your script differently than how I'm gonna show you, that's perfectly fine, but you have to be consistent and you have to be clear to the reader about what you're doing. And beyond that, you have to make your script a good read. But what if your character speaks French and you don't? I mean, how do you write that? Well, honestly, you don't have to translate. Remember, you're writing a script to be read, probably in English, so write the words in English. If you know French, that's cool, but assume the reader doesn't. Don't write French words in your script. Okay, that's cool, Jake, but how do I write foreign language speaker in my script? Well, here's the simplest way. Within the dialogue itself, use a parenthetical and write in French subtitled. And then italicize the dialogue that's spoken in French, but write it in English. If the character goes back and forth between speaking in French and in English, then the first time note the change. In French, subtitled, words that are italicized, and then in English, words that are not italicized. A quick side note here, typically if you want to emphasize something in dialogue, a word you are imagining the character emphasizing when they speak, which you should do very, very sparingly, by the way, you would typically underline that word or other words that you are emphasizing. But if a character is singing or speaking in a foreign language, typically you italicize that dialogue, and that is after a parenthetical, singing, or in Japanese, subtitle. And if it's one instance, include the parenthetical as noted and italicize the dialogue, and then move on with your story. Now rest assured, if the script is going to get made, someone will translate the dialogue later. But what if you have a whole scene of subtitles? So the character speaks German for an entire scene. I mean, do you have to write in German subtitled every time? No. After the first time, where you do include a parenthetical in German subtitled and italicize the text, any other dialogue that is in German and subtitled, all you need to do is just italicize the dialogue itself. You don't repeat the parenthetical 97 times because that's annoying to read. A good practice to get into is not to just do this once for the whole scene and try to apply it generally to all characters, but do it once per character in the scene, because maybe you have multiple characters speaking to one another in different languages. One is speaking in English and one is speaking in French. Well, you note it one time in the parenthetical for the French speaker and italicize their dialogue. If they continue to speak in French, continue to italicize their dialogue. The English speaker would be normal text. And if it's just not clear that they're speaking in English, you could include a parenthetical in English if you want. Again, we're going for clarity for the reader. But what if your character speaks in Russian for the entire film? In that case, you would italicize their dialogue throughout the whole screenplay, and perhaps during that character's introduction, you can also help the reader out, maybe by putting something in brackets or parentheses. Evgeny only speaks Russian, and move on. The first time Evgeny speaks, parenthetical, in Russian, subtitled, italicize his dialogue, and tell the story. And then for the rest of the story, just continue to italicize his dialogue. If you do this, what you're doing is you are teaching the reader how to read your script. And after they see a few times of in Japanese subtitled, and then the dialogue is in italics, you won't have to keep telling them in Japanese subtitled. They will know when they see italicized dialogue by that character that it's in a foreign language and should be subtitled. But a word of caution, please don't assume your reader knows even basic words in a foreign language. They might, but they might not. And it's always better to err on the side of clarity and just use the English words and include a parenthetical. Now, if it's a very common foreign word, okay, maybe just write the foreign word. But this usually only pertains to 1 or 2 word phrases, and you would still italicize it. At the same time, if you don't know a foreign language and you try to use Google Translate, for example, or something like that, to recreate the language and write the actual foreign words in your screenplay, if the reader actually knows that language and knows how bad your translation is, it's gonna go poorly. Plus, you will be taking up twice the space on the page. Once to write the sentence in Finnish, and also once to write the sentence in English, so the reader knows what is being said. So just write it in English, but use parentheticals and italics to note any foreign language words within your screenplay. And if it's a character who will regularly speak a foreign language in your script, it's okay to have a short note to the reader in your character introduction. And if you want to know how to write effective character introductions when we first see that character, you should check this out. Please don't forget about the fun buttons below, especially if you found value in this video. And when you tell a story that matters. See you later.